what is the modern woman in your view?
I don't want to answer that question because I think that a lot of people have like really stereotypical notions of what the modern woman is. I think there's plenty of mildly traditional women. So I would prefer it if he answered the question about what the modern woman is.
What is the modern woman?
Yeah, I would actually ask for like, I mean, that's going to be difficult.
Okay, I'll jump on the grenade. I'll jump on the grenade.
No, I don't like. I'll do it, right? But the problem is like the modern woman.
I'll answer it for you guys.
If I want to do it, so if I want to do it within if I want to do it within the context of the conversation that we're having, right? What I would say is that the modern woman is someone that is affected deeply by anime, someone that is a person with so many choices that it is a crippling level of choices, that they lack cultural norms and they lack the guardrails that previous generations had so that they could actually achieve their goals and be happy and content.
So I won't get into stereotypes. I'll just tell you that the 70% of millennial females vote for the Democratic Party and support the party agenda, which is defined as strong welfare states, what we would describe as social justice or intersectional issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a smaller portion of the modern women believes in traditional family conservative values. Yeah. So it's usually to say that they are more goal and career oriented than in the past, modern women of today, as opposed to 100 years ago, and more politically active and more left economic leaning and left cultural leaning.
Sure. And I think we can point to a variety of reasons for why that would be, particularly when we're in the day and age. And by the way, like I'm not pro-abortion. I'm relatively speaking like anti-abortion. But when we're talking about like boiling down modern binary politics into subjects, I care about guns. Okay. I love the Second Amendment. I think, I believe in it wholeheartedly. So when every time that the Democrats threaten the Second Amendment, I become more right wing. Well, within the past like decade or two, we've had Republicans not only openly threaten like birth control, Roe versus Wade, all that kind of stuff. We had them succeed. They effectively achieved one of the greatest social conservative victories in the past like 50 years. So I'm not surprised that women are jumping left. They're doing it in reaction to the right.
I suppose you could argue it's not a victory if you lose a battlefield and reclaim it. It's technically a victory, but you're still net zero.
I guess. I don't know where we really want to take it from here. I would probably
a conservative victory would be the abolishment of abortion.
A social conservative victory would be the abolition of abortion. Abolition. I agree. Yeah, 100%. But the point is that like we live in a society. We're in a democratic republic. There's a whole bunch of different tribes that all vie over how to live, in the future. And I think that women are advocating in their own self-interest, which makes sense. If you want, this is something that I thought about. I disagree with it, but conceptually I understand it. Men, relatively speaking, have bodily autonomy. There's a reduced ability for us to get raped and murdered because we have a larger capacity for violence, in my opinion. With women, you're almost at constant threat through the society that you could be raped, you could be physically abused, you can do this, you can do that. And so you're constantly surrounded by potential threats. And one of the ways that you can assert control is that if somebody rapes you and impregnates you, then you can assert control over whether or not you carry out that pregnancy. So that might feel like some level of control in a potentially hostile society. So that's probably why they want to grab onto it as like a measure of control. I still disagree with it.
Yeah. Going back to just the entirety of the conversation, my thought is why does the state have to do these things? You mentioned that people should take care of their elderly. Women should be protected from these instances of rape and things like this. Why do you feel it's the state's job or not individuals?
This gets back to like the Leviathan, right? Power abhors a vacuum, and there will always be abuses. Human beings are naturally self-interested, selfish creatures, and so there's always going to be abuse. There's always going to be neglect. There's always going to be malevolence. The state has the ability to step in and assert some level of justice. Yeah.
So there's a lot of things I want to get into. So, like, I don't necessarily disagree with you that women have the perception of a lack of bodily autonomy. Obviously Roe v. Wade. I don't like that kind of like univariate analysis of like a policy. Yeah, I'm sure it had, a swing towards, Gen Z being more in favor of the Democrats, et cetera. But I think this problem is so much deeper, and I connect it to welfare, right? I think welfare is the predominant issue with the breakdown of gender issues within our country. So what is the traditional role of men in most societies, right? It is a provider-protector role. When we look at evolutionary psychology work in terms of attraction, we can look at David Buss's work in the evolution of desire, right? And, he kind of puts forward that kind of gender theory or that social role that you often hear from a lot of podcasters, even though they're not sure that they're referencing it, which is that, men tend to be attracted to females for fertility signs, right? Women tend to be attracted to men for signs of resource provision, right? There's other work in terms of Simon Cohen's like extreme male brain theory of autism, which is a fairly controversial work with a lot of citations. And like he breaks it down as females tend to work towards empathizing and men tend to work towards systematizing, right? Men look at tools, they look at hierarchy, they look at like how to do things with things. Women look at maintaining relationships, things of that nature. And so what happens when your society utilizes the state and takes away all of the community aspects, right? All of the interconnectedness, all of the social capital out of the male role of being a provider, out of the social safety net that men did for so long, and then funnels that to women. Well, I'll tell you what happens. What you end up with is young men who cannot have capital accumulation because the government takes their money now. They can't invest. They have less money to invest. They have less money to build wealth. They don't have the women are no longer seeking them to be providers. They're boss bitches. They're independent. They have their own money. But half of the money that everybody is making is taxed in some degree to move towards other people. It has completely destroyed the natural dynamics in gender in those relationships.
A specific example that came up quite a bit in the past few years was a study that came out and a subsequent story by the New York Post that women are struggling to find men who will date them who make as much. And
absolutely.
The issue is actually quite simple. If there's a 35-year-old man who makes $70,000 a year, he's not going to date a 35-year-old woman. He's going to date a 22-year-old woman because that amount of money to a 22-year-old is more. Sure. And so we've seen this phenomenon with dating apps in particular, where young men are cut out of the dating market because, as the story goes, your dating pool used to be your sphere of influence, your friends, your schools, whatever, your work.
Now it's
and so
internet.
Now it's everything. So what happens is a 22-year-old guy at a university, his dating pool is 22-year-old girls or, freshmen, 18 to 22. Sure. And the women, their dating pool is the men. But with the rise of social media, women, those young men in college are now competing with 30-year-old guys who make, $80,000 a year.
Yep.
And when it's actually quite simple. The young woman gets a message from a guy and he says, "Do you want to come hang out in my dorm with my buddies? We're going to order pizza." And she goes, "That sounds fun." She gets another message from a 30-year-old guy says, "How about I pick you up in my convertible? We go out for a movie and a dinner and then go drive by the lake." Sure. Which one does she choose? She's going to choose the more fun, more luxurious adventure. Yeah. The result has been that right now, the highest rate of virginity for men 30 and under and increasing. This was actually in the past 5 years. So now the virginity rate up to 35 is about 1/3. And these are not guys who are, Seamus Coughlin, he's a Catholic. He responded with based when he heard that. Because he's Catholic.
Come on, Seamus.
Can I just point out real quick, though?
Just
it's
one final.
Females, too.
One final, but less so. So the final point is, what I told Seamus was, these are not guys who are waiting for marriage. These are guys who are cut out from finding a partner at all because of, so I guess.
They're incels, they're not volcels.
But these are just regular guys.
Sure.
It's not some weird nerdy guy.
I can explain this.
Let's go.
I can explain this without a univariate analysis, but I'll let you go first.
Thank you. So you tied it to welfare, and I basically I want to address your point, and then I want to get into this because I feel like this is the meat. It's what people came for, so to speak. You wanted to tie it to welfare. Well, in preparation for this conversation, I went ahead and took a look at like international welfare, the different states that have different issues, and it seems like every single country on the planet is facing similar issues. Increases in single-family homes. They are experiencing a birth rate that is plummeting towards 2. There are all the antisocial issues of like violence and all that kind of stuff. This is happening like worldwide. And then looking at developed countries versus non-developed countries or developing countries, so to speak, welfare didn't really correlate with whether or not people were experiencing these sexual issues. As an example, Mexico and Costa Rica have some of the lowest GDP spent on welfare. They also have the per capita rate is incredibly low, and they still experience these sexual I'll call it dysgenic issues, right? But then you also go to places like Germany or Norway or Sweden. And what's funny is these countries have more welfare, but they actually have moderately less dysgenic issues compared to the United States. And so I would still agree to all of these problems, but I wouldn't tie it to welfare. And the things that I would tie it to, which you guys mentioned, is the Industrial Revolution, the sexual revolution, and I would say we are currently in the information age revolution, where you can, as an example, like you just said, you can date, you're not dating your community, you could date the entire city, the entire state.
Okay, so worse than that, you can date robots.
Right.
Okay, so let me respond to that. So you're absolutely true. Anyone that tries to do like I said, a univariate analysis on anything is a snake oil salesman, or they don't know what they're talking about, right? Like nothing is ever one issue.
Sure.
Right. My issue is the growth of the state supplanting cultural norms, right? So so to weave this thread, I got to get into a little bit more psychology, right? So, obviously I brought up Durkheim, right? He wrote Division of Labor, 1893, or Division of Labor and Society, 1893. And then later his most famous work probably is Suicide, 1897, right? Where he discusses the concept of anomie, right? He was the first guy to discover that
Can you define anomie, because you've said it 2 or 3 times and I've
Yeah, so an anomie is a sense of normlessness when culture changes or institutions change too fast and people they're less understanding of what is expected of them and what the standard ought be.
Sure.
Right? And so, there's a lot that goes into this, right? So you can look at Robert K. Merton's kind of work, right, in structural functionalism. You don't hear much about structural functionalism because it's the only conservative aspect of sociology, right? So obviously they don't talk about it, right? But he's the guy that invented broken windows theory. He's the guy that coined the phrase unintended consequences, right? And so, there is, when you have welfare that supplants communities, that supplants, it supplants social capital, right? When you said this, and you're absolutely right, that like power and systems, right, they abhor a vacuum, right? And you're absolutely right. When the government steps in, they take in that space, right? And what they have supplanted is social capital. They have supplanted neighbors looking after their neighbors' kids because that was necessary at one time. Because if you didn't belong to a society, you didn't, like a fraternal society, I mean, obviously we belong in society, right? But if you weren't a part of these groups, if you weren't active member of your community, if you didn't have a church, you didn't have all these things, then people would be left out. Your life would suck, but problems would cause. And what we've done is we've given that over to the state. And what this has done is destroyed the social capital that gives us norms, right? I'm going to use like a little metaphor to kind of make this simple, right? If I live in a society that says 1 through 10 are bad things and you shouldn't do those bad things, right? But I'm really fucking good at number 7. And I'm talented and I really care about number 7. What I do is I break norms and I go do number 7 and I do it so fucking good that I come back with number 7 and I go, look at the value that I have done with number 7. But when you have a society that says, do whatever you want, be free, there are no cultural norms, sure, multiculturalism is great, there is no community, you don't know who your neighbors are, you go off and you do 7, but you get distracted by, well, should I do 1 or should I do 10? And then what you end up with is you suck and you're engaged in all these degenerate things that should have kept a cohesive society together. And no one cares when you come back.
Real quick. So are you saying that the system of welfare has enabled damage to our cultural and social structures?
Absolutely. Not only enabled, it has created, without a doubt.
But your argument would be industrialization and technological revolution has
sexual revolution and information
is the culprit of that.
So think about this. Like, how is that possible? How do you get sexual revolution, hedonism, equity, feminism, right? These things coincide. It's a chicken and egg scenario because the women, as we said, like I said, men are systematizing, women are empathizing. As you said, women are voting, especially Gen Z, are 70% Democrat. Women are voting for welfare systems that empower women.
Okay,
the DEI. What does DEI do except give women useless email jobs in corporations?
Women are allowed to vote for these things.
Yeah, because we have an it's liberalism. So and by the way, like liberalism,
democracy's dumb, but that's a separate point.
right. So liberalism, I think, is a perfectly fine, especially in a free society. I think it's a perfectly fine governing society or governing philosophy. However, I think it's a very terrible like personal development philosophy. I don't think it gives you enough information on how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to grow up, how to be a good person, et cetera, et cetera. Liberalism is should be a general governing framework, but we should be fighting within the framework of liberalism for how men should grow up. And so, and also how women should grow up as well. I'm going to give you a rebuttal to one of your points, and then I'm going to talk about like a solution, I guess. So you said that the government is in here stealing 15 to 10% of our checks or whatever, and therefore
that's just Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Just give me a moment.
Social Security, Medicare.
So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid entitlement programs are stealing all of our resources, and therefore we don't have enough capital in order to develop ourselves, in order to become men, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, since power abhors a vacuum, this was all happening in the 19th century. And you can go back and find the abuses in the late 19th and early 20th century from capitalists. And I don't mean that as a derogatory term. I mean that from the people who ran corporations. The people who ran corporations, similar to Google, except for maybe Google's a little bit nicer, is they created like compounds for workers to live in. And then they charged them exorbitant rents for their living conditions. Then they charged them exorbitant rates for the food consumption items that they had at the local grocer. And they also made the locals sign contracts saying that they would purchase all of their goods first from the local grocer. And so while it's private and it's privately negotiated, power seems to, especially nefarious power, seems to always want to manipulate its subordinates into giving every excess amount of energy into the above system. Anybody who's sorry, I'm ranting, but I'll try to be brief. Any person who's worked in corporate America understands this. And the reason why is because they give you bullshit metrics that you have to fulfill every single day. That takes all of your energy. That way you basically give your soul to the company. And if you're unwilling to give your soul to the company, they drum you out.
Okay, so can I have a direct refutation of this very quickly?
Sure, yeah.
Right, so Hayek has a wonderful quote that in The Road to Serfdom that I think accurately depicts the counter argument here, which is just centralized systems destroy spontaneous order.
Thank you.
Right? You're not wrong that evil people have existed and done bad things or done it. Now, I do think that your characterization is a little like lefty of like, some of these corporations, right? I mean, like
the problem with being a centrist.
Well, I think it's a little silly because, specifically when we're talking about Pullman Town, I think is what you're mostly referencing. We're talking about the grocery store. There's that famous quote from where, he says, I live in a Pullman house. I work a Pullman job. I eat Pullman food. And when I die, I'm going to be buried in a Pullman coffin. Yep. Right? Like that is like this very bleak and dystopian thing, except the people there were making like, relative to the average American, were making double, sometimes triple the wages of other people. Their children were getting education that agrarian farmers could never have gotten. They did have a home. Those homes were showcases some of this, like the brilliant age of capitalism, because these homes were nicer than any homes any regular poor people could fit.
Well,
now, were there
Google
problems?
Would be saying the same thing though. Google would be like, "Look at the great. We have a sushi bar, guys.
I
we got
agree.
this.
Listen,
we got that."
I agree that corporations took advantage of the large amount of capital that they had, to make more and more. Like, I agree that there are always going to be bad people in any system. But what I am talking about and what I am arguing is not here some examples of bad things happen in past, therefore welfare good. I'm making an actual argument here, right? Which is that I'm talking about from a praxeological position, looking at the economic impact of creating a society where the government takes your money now for a presumed good elsewhere. So there's a couple of issues here. It prioritizes.
I want to have a back and forth. I don't want to listen to
you went on a rant, and I want to make the argument, so I'll try and make it quick here.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.